So strategic planning is, a process of how do you get from A to Z and do it as seamlessly as possible. The first step is usually, what are your priorities, your goals, the mission of your operation. And, in the solid waste management world, sometimes these on surface can appear to conflict with each other. For example, in recycling, is the priority getting the most material or the cleanest material? In waste collection, is it serving more households per day or reducing the number of injuries on the job? When you look at the financial world, is it keeping your billing rates as low as possible or having enough money to make sure that you have enough trucks running on the street or sufficient funds to close your landfill? And all of those topics we will be discussing today. The strategic planning process also allows you to focus your energy and resources. After I left SCS Engineers, I was the director of a solid waste authority in Ohio. And, in the public sector, there's never enough money, there's never enough people, and your demands from your customer base, from your government officials keeps increasing. So the planning process can really allow you to figure out how can we use limited resources in the best manner possible. And at the same time, strengthening your operations. The other part that's important with strategic planning is every organization, every company, every community has a diverse set of perspectives. And I always call it consensual, modified consensus. That you're not going to have everybody through a strategic planning process say the selected pathway is A+ and perfect. But if you can get everyone to at least have a shared vision of where are we going, what are the obstacles that we may encounter, and what are the key priorities that we want to see happen at the end of the day, that planning process is a success. And at the same time, you want to be able to measure. When I worked at the Clinton Foundation and when Chelsea Clinton joined the foundation, her first observation coming from McKinsey, which is a big management consulting firm, is if we can't measure it, are we really doing it? And some things are very hard to measure. Recycling quantities, composting quantities, disposal quantities can be measured. But the impact of landfill diversion on air quality, on public health, isn't always quite so easy. But at least if there's some discussion of, what can we measure and what things maybe can't be quantified but still need to be highlighted as an importance of what we're doing, needs to be part of the planning process. And then finally, at the end of the day, strategic planning process, you may need to adjust your goals. You may need to reprioritize. And for some organizations, a strategic planning process means that we may need to change the way we do business. I'm currently working with a large Midwestern city, and they're struggling right now. Do they stay in the business of waste collection or do they privatize? And their strategic planning process could, at the end of the day, say they significantly change the way they do business. But again, this process, I always say the report is the evil necessity. The beauty of strategic planning is the process to get everyone looking at the issues, creating a shared vision, and identifying how we're going to measure success. Financial security, this is for our personal lives, professional lives. It's basically saying when you're running a solid waste authority, a district, a recycling program, a landfill, you need to make sure that you aren't worrying about income to cover your expenses and that you have enough money to achieve your goals. Sounds pretty straightforward and easy, but as Vita will discuss, sometimes just getting trucks on the street or getting the landfill operating on a daily basis doesn't allow you to always step back and say, where are we going to get the funds for post-closure when we don't have revenue coming in 25 years from now? And it's sometimes easy to dip into those reserves. So again, Vita will be discussing some strategies to get you there. So as I said, the case study I'd like to talk about is the Lorain County Class 2 compost facility. And in Ohio, where I'm from, Class 2 means you can accept yard waste and food waste. So, Lorain County, like everywhere that is in the U.S., we're really, really raising awareness about the problems with food waste. Statistics like 40% of what we buy ends up in a landfill. We're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on groceries that never get eaten. At the same time, we have so many areas of the country where food insecurity is a significant problem. So Lorain County, which is up in northwestern Ohio, northeastern Ohio, I guess, they really wanted to tackle food waste. Lorain County is a rural county, but they were surrounded by some bigger population centers, most specifically Cleveland is right to the east of them. So some of the things that we had to consider when saying to Lorain County, do you proceed with the food waste composting facility? The number one positive is the county had access to 18.5 acres of a brownfield site that could be redeveloped with US EPA grant dollars. This site was flat, it had a cement pad, didn't have any water running through it, it had a fence. I mean, it was just about the most perfect site you could find for food waste composting. The only downside is, as I said, Lorain is pretty rural, and this was in the middle of Lorain, in the middle of nowhere. So transportation of food waste and yard waste was an issue. They had just completed a strategic planning process that identified organic composting as a priority for this county. The Solid Waste Division had over $3 million in undedicated capital reserves. So in Ohio, if you are running a solid waste district and you have a large landfill in your district, there is a $1 to $2 surcharge put on every ton of garbage. Within Lorain County, as I said, very rural county, had a huge Republic landfill that served a big portion of northeastern Ohio, including Cleveland. So they had more money than they were spending. However, one of the challenges is that the Solid Waste Division does not collect waste. Everything in Lorain County was extremely privatized, and Republic, as you might imagine, would much prefer to take all waste they collect to their own landfill than diverting it up to a composting facility in the middle of nowhere. The county did have in its plan that they could adopt flow control, which basically could tell Republic, you must use the compost facility. However, Lorain County is a pretty conservative place, and having the government tell a private company what to do was probably the last thing we wanted to suggest. The others, as I said, the private sector collected waste, but they also operated compost facilities. And the composters were not Republic, but two pretty large Ohio composters had good name recognition, producing a high-quality product. One of them was very landlocked and couldn't expand. And so, maybe the possibility of reaching out to them and coming up with some kind of partnership was something we also evaluated. So our approach, and I'll go into each one of these in more detail. As you can see, it's, how big is our site? What can we do with it? How do we get the feedstock? Who's the competition? How much can we sell this material for? And at the end of the day, would this facility make any economic sense? So as I said, we had this beautiful 18-acre site, and we did a preliminary site assessment, and I was actually teamed with SCS engineers on this project. And that site assessment was saying we could take in about 18,000 tons a year of yard waste, 10,000 tons of food waste. It could be operated with a windrow system, which in the composting world, windrow systems are the least expensive, most land intensive. You can go to a covered hybrid system, a GORE, aerated static pile system. You could go to in-vessel. But we didn't need to do this because it looked like there was a lot of land, and so we could get a less expensive option. Securing feedstock, and this is where I see both recycling and composting facilities get in a lot of trouble. So I was able to find out in the state of Wisconsin about 23.20% of your disposed waste stream is yard waste and food waste, or i.e. organics. A lot of entities use this number to say how much yard waste or food waste could come to a composting facility, or 14% of your waste stream is paper. That doesn't mean that much material is going to come to a facility. So in Lorain County, at 23.20%, that would mean that there was 67,000 tons of organics available for this compost facility. Obviously, that would exceed the site of this facility. So then we really started looking at, okay, what's out there and what can actually be captured. And so we worked with each one of the small communities in Lorain County that already had some composting facilities, And then we identified the ones who wants to stay in the business of composting, who wants to get out. Most of them were pretty eager to get out because they were incurring costs of composting material, but they weren't selling it. The municipal facilities were just taking it, producing a product that residents come and get for free. It's a pretty, that business model has been around since we started talking about composting and landfill diversion 30 years ago. It's not the best way to run a facility unless you really want a lot of public sector subsidies. And one of the priorities for Lorain County is they did not want to have public sector subsidies. They would invest in it as a capital investment, but operation and maintenance needed to be a standalone. So for our initial planning analysis, we said we felt very confident that we could capture about 5,100 tons of yard waste and food waste, which again, significantly less than what was being landfill disposed. So we then said, okay, if that's all we can get, how much land do we now need? And going through the conceptual design again, for that amount, we only needed about 6 acres of the 18-acre site, which means the rest of the site was actually could be co-developed for something like tire shredding. So that made the site even more attractive and viable. We then said, okay, we know we've got some composters producing some great product here, and we also want to know, are any of them charging tipping fees? So what we found out is in the private sector, for municipalities, none of the private composters were charging individuals or municipalities to use their facility. They were charging, though, private landscapers. And they, the leaves, the brush, the bag yard waste, various tipping fees. And you'll notice under bag yard waste, that's one of the higher tipping fees. And that's primarily because when it comes in a bag, you don't know how much of that is contaminated. And so in the private sector, if there's risk, you're going to pay more. Food scraps, the same thing. Food scraps were a higher tipping fee. And primarily, again, it was more contamination and concerns about plastic film, forks. So again, it was more of an unknown. We did find that the product sales were pretty robust. Compost was selling for $25 to $55 a ton, and mulch $15 to $40 a ton. So based on this market research, we found out that a facility could charge for some materials coming in, and there was potential to sell the product. But again, they were going to be competing with the private sector to sell this product and get the material coming in. So we went through and did all of the equipment, maintenance analysis, labor, and then we have a conditional model that actually Bob Gardner on our phone is going to talk about. We call it our conditional what-if model. So basically, we have this model, and we did about 18 scenarios for Lorain County. In fact, I'm going to go back just a second on that. We'll get to the model. Hold on. One of the things I skipped over, my apologies. So as I said, this facility was going to cost about $1.3 million to develop, and that was for mostly land grading, equipment. They didn't have to do a lot to the site because there was a US EPA grant that was out there. They had 2 options for recovering that CapEx cost. The county could finance it, and they could go into debt for 15 years and have 5% interest. They were borrowing money. Every 7 years, they would have to purchase new equipment. So that was one option for financing the facility. The other that said, this was a kind of unique situation. The solid waste district was sitting on some money, like over $3 million in money, and every year more money would be coming in. So our second option was that they just use the district reserves and not borrow any money, and then every year build up, as Vita will be talking about, a capital reserve fund. So instead of borrowing money to buy new equipment, they could just build up this capital reserve fund and buy equipment and not go into debt. So as I said, this model did all these different scenarios, analyses of can we sell the compost for a high, mid, low price, tipping fees, high, mid, low, no tipping fee on yard waste, but a tipping fee on food waste. So we could really sit there and run all these different options with the county. The other thing that came out in the county as a priority is they did not want to charge a tipping fee on yard waste from residents. The county government structure or the government officials felt like they probably would lose their seat in office if they chose that approach. So at the end of the day, we kind of narrowed this whole universe down, And as you can see, the areas that they were in the black at the end of year one cash flow, that none of the scenarios required a yard waste tipping fee for them to have money at the end of the year. But they had to be able to sell that product for the mid-range price. And after a lot of discussions with the county, we realized that probably to go year one, head-to-head against the private sector with good name recognition to sell a product probably could be suicidal for this project. And so at the end of the day, what was decided is during the first 5 years, it would be a public-private partnership. Lorain County would own the composting facility. They would work with one of the private operators and the one who is actually running out of space at their existing Lorain County site. For the first 5 years, they would operate the facility. The product would be sold as a Lorain County product, but with a stamp of approval from the private sector. They worked with landscapers to start bringing that material in to charge a tipping fee on that yard waste. Residents could tip for free. They started working with the major institutions, such as hospitals, to separate that food waste, start building that into the contract. They never had to contemplate flow control. And at the end of the day, they were able to present to their county administrator and their commissioners that they had a solid business plan to divert food waste that would not require government subsidies. People would be allowed to tip their yard waste for free, and they would not enact flow control that would offend the private sector. And at this point, they have a new county administrator, and he is extremely receptive to this idea. And with that, I am going to pass the ball to Bob Gardner. And I thank you for your time.
I appreciate it, Karen. I mean, one of the challenges that I think everybody is facing at this juncture is how can I optimize my overall system. And so the two case studies that I'm going to be presenting address some ideas relative to how to optimize your system. And Karen, if you could, do I have the ball? Yeah, I guess I do have the ball. Great, thank you. So the two case studies that I'm going to talk about are from Oklahoma City and the city of Virginia Beach. The Oklahoma City project was a pretty comprehensive look at the city's overall collection system. That includes everything from residential collection, recycling, bulky waste, and the like, the route structure, transfer station analysis, public surveys. It had a whole wide range of things that we looked at. The City of Virginia Beach case study was a focus on how to optimize the collection system, because in that case, the City of Virginia Beach was faced with some pretty significant fiscal limitations relative to their capital draws, and so they needed to figure out ways to save some money so they could get the capital they needed to keep their equipment on the street. So a little bit of background with regards to Oklahoma City. It's in the middle of the state. It's one of the largest cities in the country in terms of land area. It covers about, I say 620 square miles. It's got a population of about 645,000, about 200,000 households. Just to give you a sense of the size of Oklahoma City, it's got 27 miles from north to south and 40 miles from east to west. So you can imagine driving that in a given day. It has both urban and rural collection areas. What's interesting about the city of Oklahoma City is they have bifurcated their collection system. In other words, the city provides collection services primarily in the urban areas, and then they contract out collection services to waste management to collect the other part of the city. So the city collects about 40% of the homes, about 74,000 homes, and waste management about 125,000, or 90, the balance 60% of the remaining. And they also provide the recycling collection for the entire city. So pretty significant. Prior to the most recent changes, the city provided automated collection to the urban and rural areas of the city. However, their service levels varied between the urban and rural areas. Urban services included once per week automated collection, and they used 96-gallon rolling carts. which they call Big Blue. Each home gets up to 2 carts, and I'll talk about that in a second. If you need an additional cart, a higher monthly fee is charged. It also includes it did include weekly recycling collection using 18-gallon bins, which was commonly referred to as dual-stream recycling. The city currently at that juncture, did not collect cardboard due to the constraints of the bin system, and I'll talk about that as well in a moment. Bulky waste is provided on a monthly basis, and residents can put bags out of their carts when their carts are full, which is an interesting little side note relative to what the Oklahoma City does. It kind of thwarts the whole idea of, or the reason why you have automated collection. But during the spring, one of the reasons is during the spring growing season, a common practice in Oklahoma City is what they call scalping. And when I first started working on that, I said, well, what is that? And what happens is, in scalping is, they have a lot of Bermuda grass, and in order to get the Bermuda grass to grow healthily, you got to scalp it. In other words, take it down to its roots, and that generates a whole bunch of bag waste throughout the city and impacts their collection efficiency. And so they just got a unique system where they allow a certain amount of bags outside the cart. They average, in terms of some statistics, if some of you are on the collection side, they collect about, the waste management, about 901 pickups per urban route. The city is a little bit less, 805. Average pickup in the rural is about 551. So you get houses are spaced much wider apart and less density. It's kind of interesting. The city is fortunate to have 4 privately owned landfills, either in the city or immediately adjacent, all within about 11 miles of most of the routes. Their disposal rates are probably at this juncture, they're around $20 a ton, so pretty low disposal rates. So in terms of what we were ultimately tasked with doing and evaluating, Kenyon, if you could change the next slide, please. We were retained by the city to help them to evaluate a number of alternative collection scenarios. And so as I said, we were retained to look at the various collection scenarios, which I'll go through, and evaluated recycling options and present our findings and made recommendations with regards to service enhancements. Next slide, please. The city previously collected its recyclables in what was, I said, it was a dual stream approach using 18-gallon bins. These were called little blue containers, and they were provided to customers, and one of the overall recycling rates was only 3%, and that was about 9,000 tons per year, so pretty low. In addition, the city collected residential MSW in 96-gallon roll-off carts, as I mentioned, and they have the various bags. And I put this picture here just to give you a sense. This is pretty common. So you have your automated collection, then you have to go around and get out your vehicle and pick up the bags and throw them into the vehicle. Not the most efficient use of an automated collection vehicle. And so part of the things that we looked at ultimately was do they go to full containerization and what that would look like. Next slide, please. One of the first steps we did was to perform both a quantitative and a qualitative surveys of the city residents. And those surveys covered questions regarding residential recycling collection services, yard waste collection, cost of service, additional service residents might be interested in. The bottom line results from the surveys that the city's solid waste collection program was one of the highest rated programs in the city, along with fire and rescue. With respect to recycling, we were interested in knowing whether residents liked the current bin system, whether they would support a single stream recycling approach, or would they be willing to pay more for expanded recycling services. For those surveyed, about 41% liked the dual stream system that they had, 33% supported changing to larger containers, 11% thought the services should be extended to the rural areas, and 11% were undecided, and a small percentage wanted to eliminate the program. As such, the city concluded there was an appetite for change, along with a perceived need to increase recycling. The residents wanted more. About 75% of the residents rarely used their bag service. It was more like 2 to 3% use it frequently. And bulky waste was a very popular service. Next slide, please. The hard work began with evaluating service levels and collection scenarios. As a backdrop, the city's basic levels of service include once-a-week collection using the 96-gallon blue containers, monthly bulky waste collection, and unlimited bag service. Recycling was collected once per week in the urban areas only, and the residents had unlimited bag service as well. This was what we considered the status quo scenario. Next slide, please. Scenarios 2 and 3 were similar to scenarios 1, except that recycling was changed to single stream using large 96-gallon rolling containers with once-a-week collection for scenario 2 and once every other week for scenario 3. The once-a-week recycling collection was considered a possible transition alternative because the current recycling system was once per week using 18-gallon bins. Next slide, please. Scenario 4 and 5 considered full containerization. Like 2 and 3, looked at once a week versus once every other week recycling options. We also considered transitioning to a 5-day per week collection schedule for a total of 10 scenarios or combination of services. Through all this, the city was interested in understanding efficiencies that could result in improved collection of recyclables. For example, for the full containerization options, we assumed the number of houses collected per truck would increase, which means potentially fewer routes and personnel to accomplish tasks. We evaluated the performance of the existing collection system, both the city's fleet and theoretically the city's contractor fleet. We also considered siting and constructing a transfer station to increase en-route time and improve the efficiency. However, given the proximity of the 4 landfills serving the city, we kind of concluded that constructing a transfer station didn't appear to provide sufficient benefit in terms of reduced fuel uses and increased productivity. Next slide, please. This next couple of slides I'm going to show you some of the summary results of the analyses that we did. And this first slide shows the net present worth analysis looking over a 12-year period for each of the scenarios considered. And then the following slide I'll have in a moment deals with the dollar per household per month that might look like. The blue bars are the current 4-day-a-week collection services, and the green bars are the 5-day-per-week collection scenarios. And we did project some cost increases with the increased recycling service, but some cost reduction over the 12-year period, resulting if you did to a 5-day-per-week collection operation. Right now they do 4-day a week when that 1 day they have downtime and use that for maintenance purposes and catching up. Next slide, please. However, when you look at the analysis on that dollar per household per month, the change in costs were pretty small. And we projected that increased recycling services using the large containers and collecting every other week would result in an increase of 47 cents per household per month. But we also estimated that recycling collection would increase by about 300%. And our analysis also considered the net reduction in disposal costs associated with increased recycling. Next slide, please. Our recommendation was to them was to consider changing to a 5-day-per-week collection schedule if they had adopted the single-stream recycling. The city ultimately elected to defer on this recommendation. And our recommendation of the city was to transition to a single-stream recycling and change recycling collection from once a week to once every other week. We suggested a target transition date of February 2018 in order to work through the kinks in the system before the higher volume summer months. And just a note, however, Hurricane Harvey threw a wrench into the works. Hurricane Harvey hit the state of Texas hard, and in particular the plants that manufacture the resins for the carts. As such, the cart manufacturers couldn't get the resin to manufacture the nearly 180,000 carts that needed to be deployed, and that ultimately delayed the implementation schedule, which I'll show in a moment, by about 5 months. Next slide, please. We also recommended that the city reconfigure its collection areas and optimize its collection areas. This was probably the more significant operational change for the city. As I mentioned earlier, the city collects part of the city, about 74,000 homes in waste management. The balance, or 170,000 homes. The proposed new collection areas would meet some new objectives in terms of it needed to meet some objectives. One, about 40% of the households had day changes. We didn't want to have any more than that. Our goal was to minimize those, but in order to improve efficiencies, the changes needed to occur. We actually had more aggressive changes proposed, which have further improved efficiency, but the city was not willing to make those more aggressive changes at this juncture. They felt it was going to be a little bit hard for the citizens to one, go from changing when their collection days are collected to the way they do recycling. They just wanted to make it easier for the citizens. They are maintaining the current number of vehicles dispatched. They have about 23 automated, 1 rear loader, and 1 small loader, so that's working out pretty well. They've increased the city's service area customers by about 10 to 12,000, and that's pretty significant. The recycling areas increased by about 6,000 customers. They felt that was going to increase their cost about $708,000 a year. But the benefits were improved collection efficiency, reduced cost, increased number of residents involved in recycling, reduced disposal costs, and we ultimately minimized the day changes to about 18,000 customers and boundary changes to about 100, that affected about 131,000 customers. Next slide, please. I showed this particular schedule to show how we kind of set things up in the overall course of things. We had the overall planning activities, which lasted for about 6 or 7 months relative to getting this all together, and then the ultimate plan of procuring, delivering, logistically to get all those 180,000 carts out, and we did that, and they began providing the new recycling services in July of last year. Next slide, please. So as I said, the county successfully initiated the new recycling service and the service changes in July 1 of 2018, and over 170,000 new carts were deployed. And the collection day changes were implemented. They improved recycling. As I mentioned, we estimated that the city would increase from 9,000 to 27,000 tons per year on the recycling, and after 7 months, they were trending upward of the 22 to 24,000 tons per year, so pretty close to what we projected. And as such, I see as a success. With more education, this trend will continue despite the Chiana Sword. Waste Management has upgraded their MRF to handle a single stream, and contamination is averaging only about at 25%. I've seen much higher with single stream systems. And so that was actually similar to their dual stream system, so that's encouraging. Next slide, please. So the city successfully initiated the new recycling services and the service changes, like I said, on July 1 of last year. And so they were able to ultimately coordinate with procurement to get the carts delivered. They provided significant public education associated with the operations in this case. They started way ahead, and they used Facebook, Nextdoor, newsprint, on TV, and sent flyers out to everybody, and they really did a good job. They ended their old system early. In other words, they stopped their blue bin about a month or so before the new system would come into play. That allowed for that transition to occur, and they had a good deployment, and they've, like I said, maintained their overall contamination pretty low. So that's Oklahoma City. Very successful, I would say, in terms of unfortunate with the change in the overall recycling things that are going on. They have a unique, what we did on their procurement for the recycling services. They pay on a sliding scale depending on the weighted average commodity values associated with recyclables. And so they're able to see what their actual costs are. The next case study, Keenan, the next slide please, is for the city of Virginia Beach. And Virginia Beach is the largest city in Virginia. It has a diverse service area that includes rural, urban, and seasonal. It's a beach community. The city has a population of over 400,000 residents, and with 124,000 single-family households that the city serves. The city collects the residential single-family garbage, yard waste, bulky waste, and they contract for once every other week single-stream recycling using 96-gallon containers. All the waste is containerized, except yard waste, which can be either in bags or bundled, and yard waste is collected separately in rear loaders. Next slide, please. Several years ago, the city concluded that its routes were severely unbalanced, resulting in unbalanced workloads on route times. The city works on a task system, so many people were finishing up by noon and worked 2 jobs, while others had a full day. The city solid waste department was faced with privatization pressures, including that they needed to get their own house in order and operate as efficiently as possible, or their jobs would be at risk. They also had significant equipment and budget issues coming up that they needed to address, and they were coming out of the recession at that juncture, so they were hard pressed for dollars. Next slide, please. The city embarked on a 3-phase routing program to step by step to improve their route balancing, transition to a more automated collection system, and align their equipment and personnel needs. The end result was saving over $1.5 million per year in equipment and labor, which reduced pressures the city was facing relating to increased costs elsewhere. We reduced the number of routes from 35 to 30 routes per day, and that was pretty significant, and ultimately saved them a significant amount of dollars. As a side note, the city was fortunate to have executed its new recycling collection contract prior to China's sword. Not so good for the recycling contractor, who sent a letter to all the municipalities that they contracted with, indicating that their desire, they wanted to, if they could, renegotiate their contracts, which the city was not able, most were not able or willing to do. However, the contractor has committed to continuing per their contracts. So that's kind of interesting with regards to the impact of the various things that are happening with regards to the China sword. Next slide, please. So some contend that municipalities can't be efficient in their collection, and I understand that sometimes, but what I have found is that cities provide a service, and sometimes staff and equip their fleets to handle a wide range of services, not all of which might be quote-unquote efficient. However, the service level is typically high. And the city concluded, however, that it must run its operation in a business-like manner, must be thinking of improvements continuously, and use technology to assist the process. And the city has done that, and they're running their systems very effectively. Vita?
Hello. Okay, I just wanted to talk to all of you briefly about how you started developing a capital program, which in my experience has been the major driver for rate adjustments with solid waste utilities, well, with utilities in general. Those tend to be the largest dollar expenditures. They happen on a frequent but relatively infrequent basis, unlike operational costs. And with solid waste utilities in particular, that there doesn't tend to be a lot of long-range planning for capital. So I'll talk to you about some of the things that I see in different utilities, some of the factors that I believe affect solid waste most particularly, and then I'm going to show you a demonstration of a financial model that we built to really help maximize a utility's capital dollars while minimizing rate increases to the customers. What I tend to see with a lot of solid waste utilities is frequently there's borrowing for routine capital, things that like maybe vehicle replacements that should be technically cash funded, borrowing for those, prolonging vehicle and equipment replacements, which results in a lot of additional costs for repairs that then again hurt the cash availability to be able to replace those vehicles. Working with aging infrastructure, things like roads, some of the sorting facilities, leachate storage tanks. And then probably the biggest one that I hear people talk to me about is not really saving towards closure and post-closure. Doing the minimum required to meet financial assurance estimates, but not really having that money in reserves to be able to actually fund those costs. Some of the issues, though, that I think you face on a regular basis is whether or not solid waste utilities are actually an enterprise fund or a department within the general fund. I tend to see that either way, they're frequently not really treated like an enterprise fund. There's an aversion to raising rates, which results in the general fund transferring monies into the solid waste fund to just simply keep it operating, which means that on an annual basis, you're operating at a cash flow deficit. The rates are artificially low compared to the actual cost to serve the residents. And it's all in the interest of just deferring rate adjustments out into the future. And what will happen is by the time I work with the utility to look at their rate increases, it's been 20 years since the rates have been looked at, and they know that they have an astronomical need for planning and rate adjustments at that point. Obviously, we like to encourage people to not get to that place before they consider a financial plan, which is what I'm going to show you next. Give me 1 second. Okay, so this is a financial model that I use. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sterling, you cannot see my cursor, correct?
I can see your cursor when you're sharing your screen like that.
Perfect. Okay, good.
When it's moving around, I can see it.
Great. I'll just use that then to show you what you're looking at here. So this is a plan with a solid waste utility that has a large capital project coming up in 2027 that's for a cell closure. And they have a closure and post-closure fund. Currently, it only has about $1.5 million in it, and this project, by the time it gets to 2027 with the escalation of the costs into the future, is going to be about $3.8 million. Currently, they need a rate plan of about 4.5% to avoid some borrowings in the future with this large capital project here in 2025. This graph is showing you the capital projects funding throughout the projection period. This graph, the one that you're kind of going to keep an eye on, is your fund balance. This red line is their minimum working capital reserve target. For utilities, that's generally 3 to 6 months of expenses. And the bars are the fund balance. You have two sets of bars beside one another. The green is the current scenario, and the yellow is saved to be the same right now, but as we change what we're looking at in this, these yellow bars will stay the same and the green bars will move, and it will let us compare. The issues that we have right now is that to avoid borrowing in 2025, they needed a rate plan of about 4.5%. And they're still not transferring enough into that closure and post-closure fund to be able to avoid borrowing if they want to pay exclusively out of that fund in 2027. One of the things they also recommended is that instead of cash funding their vehicles according to the program that they have, which would create spikes in their spending, that they consider this would be their vehicle replacements. And annually that number goes up and down. Some years it's over $1 million, other years you're only $300,000. We suggested that they smooth their capital and basically create a vehicle replacement fund that they could spend an average amount or accrue an average amount towards vehicle and equipment purchases in each year of the projection period. And when we do that, I calculate, it actually improves their financial outlook because it takes some of that nearer term spending and allows them to sort of spread it over a few years. Again, talking to them about which vehicle replacements would be essential, they felt like this would be a good plan. So then the next step is to say, well, given that we now have more money coming in, how much do we need to transfer into the closure and post-closure fund to be able to get close to our goals? And this amount ended up being $325,000. When I calculate that, I now have very close to the $3.8 million in the fund. That borrowing here that we were calling for in 2027 has now gone away. In my experience with most solid waste utilities, especially ones that are operating under the general fund, they tend to be very debt averse. So this is a scenario that was much more likely to happen and gave them a solid financial plan. But conversely, well, let me also point something else out. Doing this, we actually could lower the rate increase slightly. It starts to show a little borrowing here in 2025, but it's a few $1,000s. So basically that's about as low as the rate increase could be, but they're actually able to lower their need for rate adjustment slightly. The other thing is if they were okay with that borrowing in 2027 and just wanted to reduce the amount of rate increases on their customers, we could take that transfer into the closure and post-closure fund back down to $75,000, which is where they were. And then they have excess fund balance in virtually every year of the projection period. So we could take that rate increase down to about 3.5%. Might even be able to go slightly lower than that. It starts to call for a borrowing in the furthest year of the projection period, although when it's 10 years out, I probably wouldn't be terribly concerned about that. So they could probably go with rate increases that could be as low as 3.25%. I know this is a lot to cram into a 5-minute tutorial here, and it's just really an example of how you can minimize impacts on your ratepayers while being able to maximize what you can do with your capital dollars and with your operational funds.
Thank everyone for attending, and also thank Karen, Bob, and Vita for presenting some really great information today.
All right. We do have a question that's come in. How long does it take to develop a CIP plan? So let's throw that out to the group of presenters. How long does it take to develop a CIP plan?
Vita, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, it really depends on where you are and how well you have a handle on your costs, right? So if you know what needs to be done and you just don't know how to fund it, then that can be done as part of a routine update like this. Look at your revenue sufficiency and creating the cost and the timing. So you probably have a handle on the costs for things, but you just don't know when you can afford them or how. And in that case, that can be done the same fiscal year to begin to draft a plan. Conversely, if you don't really know where you are, if you're looking at some of these things like Karen was talking about, you're trying to implement, or even Bob, you're trying to change maybe how you operate or implement different programs, that may be a multi-year process that might happen over a couple of years so that you can get the costs and not only the capital costs, but the operational impact from various projects. And then we would do a revenue sufficiency analysis. We look at, now that we know these costs, we can quantify everything, let's plug that in along with our routine capital that we know we're expecting and begin to develop a capital program. Does that answer what you were asking?
I believe so, yeah. All right.
I'll just make a comment on the last question, Sterling. Is the, for example, for Oklahoma City, the projections that we did were on a month-to-month basis. I mean, it was that detailed, and so it was the point. If we, and the way the city does their kind of their rate structure is they kind of look at a month-to-month, and as people are coming and going, and then at the end of the year they kind of figure it out and true up things. But we developed a plan that looked out 12 years and looked at their capital deployment for their equipment, for their carts, for the replacement carts, and that took about, I think we did that over about a 6-month period where we went through all the details associated with that as they worked it through.
All right, we have another question coming in from the group. Do most composting programs target residential food waste?
Sterling, I'll go ahead. This is Karen. I'll go ahead and take that one. In general, what I see is most food waste composting programs first start with pre-consumer food waste, where you're getting materials, food scraps from cafeteria waste. And again, this is in the kitchen cafeteria waste, not after people have eaten their food and scraped off their tray. Grocery stores are a good source. Produce distribution centers are a good source. But in general, as I kind of stressed several times in my presentation, you want to minimize your risk and keep your waste stream clean, and that makes your economics work out a little bit better. Once you get a better handle on the cleaner food feedstock, then you might want to start targeting the residential. But again, that's a whole different level of collection that's required. So again, typically I see pre-consumer food scraps and then post-consumer food waste.
Okay, and then just as a reminder, we have our presenters up on the screen. If you have any additional questions, you can email or give those guys a call. They would love to visit with you on a follow-up issue after the presentation's over.
All right, well, thanks everyone for attending and presenting, and thanks Sterling for keeping us rolling. Look forward to the next webinar.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you, everyone.